Stay tuned after this program for an exciting message from Historic Traveler magazine. A trek through America's Rocky Mountains offers an unbroken series of awe-inspiring perspectives on time and scale. I'm Bill Boggs in the historic Rockies, where the geology of this rugged country tells its story. On the slopes of western Colorado, dinosaur bones trapped for millions of years can be found wearing to the surface. Not far away, the homes of the first human inhabitants are sheltered in sandstone caves. And crisscrossing the whole region are the railway lines of the early pioneers who came to dig rare minerals from the ground. All of Earth's history can be found at your feet. The Rocky Mountains, a place worth exploring for every historic traveler. Our journey across 250 million years of Earth's history begins in the fossil fields of Grand Junction, Colorado. From there, we advance a few eons to the ancient Indian village at Mesa Verde, and we'll finish our tour with a ride on the narrow gauge railroad to the mining town of Silverton, Colorado. To the casual visitor, Grand Junction looks like a more scenic version of an average Colorado farm town. But beneath the picturesque vistas lie ages of dramatic upheaval. Once upon a time, this charming valley on the edge of Colorado's western slope was part of a mountain range as high as the Himalayas, formed when two plates of the Earth's crust collided. Then millions of years of wind and water eroded this landscape into its present dramatic shape, and in the process buried, fossilized, and then exposed the bones of Earth's first rulers, the dinosaurs. Some of the world's most important dinosaur discoveries have been made in this valley. Now, dino hunters from all over the world, both professional and amateur, come here for the chance to make finds of their own. The Dinimation International Society in nearby Fruita offers a variety of programs to satisfy anybody's dinomania. The most accessible and exciting place to begin your tour of dinosaur country is the Society's Devil's Canyon Science and Learning Center. The center offers more than a half acre of fascinating displays, laboratories, and program space. This quake table gives visitors a chance to find out just what it's like to experience a 5.6 earthquake. But the big attraction, especially for kids, are the lifelike, growling, tail-wagging dinosaurs that also spit, that give the Dinimation Society its name. The Society's head paleontologist is Dr. Jim Kirkland. He's built an international reputation that includes his discovery of a new dinosaur species called Utah raptor.
Yeah, this is the Utah raptor. You might know the velociraptor from the movie Jurassic Park. That's its smaller cousin. Now, this is the largest of all the raptors, at 20 foot long, 7 to 8 foot tall, and about 1,000 pounds in body weight. Now, we've got a number of bones from the animal, but this is the bone that excites most people, and this is the bone from the hind claw, the killing claw of the Utah raptor. And take a look at that, but then picture putting the horny sheath over it. You know, this is what it would be like in life, sharp enough to shave with. Ooh. Now, this thing could kick this out and kick, so it would slice an animal open, 5 and 6 foot long slices, 10 inches deep every time it kicked. So he would attack a much larger dinosaur, and in a few kicks, he would open the animal like an accordion. Certainly not a dinosaur to mess around with. Yeah.
Nearby are two other animated models representing dinosaurs found commonly in the area. The spiny-backed Stegosaurus, which is Colorado's state fossil, and this fearsome-looking Allosaurus. He's not related to the legendary Tyrannosaurus rex, who came 80 million years later, but this big meat-eater was the #1 predator of the late Jurassic period. One of Kirkland's main jobs involves leading serious enthusiasts on a dinosaur hike along what's called the Trail Through Time.
And what we're looking at here is the bent leg of a big sauropod, very likely a Patasaurus. The one I grew up learning is Brontosaurus, the thunder lizard, but certainly more properly called a Patasaurus. Now what we're seeing here is the thigh bone. There's your thigh bone. Right down there where it bends is where it would hook into the hips. And right in here, it's kind of been eroded away, is the knee area. You can see this is a pretty big animal. And it probably weighed about 20 tons, and these rocks date about 150 million years ago. So this is probably the largest dinosaur we're going to see on this hike today. In fact, you're in the land of the giant dinosaurs. We have several kinds that probably reached over 100 feet long that are known from the Grand Valley region.
These bone hunters aren't just your average day trippers. They love dinosaurs so much that they've signed for a 5-day program that will let them actually dig for bones with trained scientists. This tour along the trail through time is part of their training for the dig site. Once participants in the program have gone through a day of these hikes, lectures, and orientation, they're ready for the main event.
Well, this is the Mygat Moor Quarry out here in western Colorado in Rabbit Valley. This site was discovered in 1981 by Pete Mygat, who's still working the quarry very diligently and is one of the great promoters of this site.
What have you found here in this quarry?
Well, we've gotten 8 different kinds of dinosaurs. We've got 4 of the long neck types of dinosaurs. We have several meat-eating dinosaurs. Most common is Allosaurus, but we also have Ceratosaurus and perhaps Marshallsaurus.
Much of the digging here is actually done by the tourists who sign up for these programs, and the results have yielded some serious paleontology. Recently, program participants discovered a small armored dinosaur called Mimura pelta.
One of the first things you learn to do, of course, is how to excavate a dinosaur. And it's certainly not digging potatoes. We go a lot more slowly and more precisely using things like dental tools and simple, easy-to-get tools like screwdrivers. But we teach folks it's not like digging potatoes. We want to work in real clean areas because the bones are subtle. As you can see, they're tough to tell from the rock. So you want to have a real clean work area. But we also want to get across to people the science of dinosaur paleontology. You know, how do we do the detective work? How do we go in taking a piece of rib and use it to interpret the biology of the animal? But we also are trying to get across to the public the excitement of the science, how we go about interpreting the way of life of these animals, you know, how we work as paleo detectives, how we use the data from the rocks we have here, the mudstones, this dinosaur dung adobe that we're digging in, to try to interpret what these animals were eating, how we look at a leg bone, such as this Allosaurus over here, to interpret what was perhaps its running speed, how fast could it run, how high could it jump, was this animal a carnivore or was it a scavenger, was this thing killing its prey? Certainly, I believe it was killing its prey.
In addition to doing most of the work, participants in the program also contribute to financial support of a lot of the paleontology being done in the Grand Junction area through their program fees, which can range up to $1,000. There are programs for adults, programs for children, and every day there's a discovery. Like today, they discovered this intact Allosaurus claw.
The Dynamation Society excavations include lodging, but if you come to attractions like the Devil's Canyon Science Center, you may want to stay at the historic Hotel Melrose. Built in 1908 by a local farmer who immigrated from London, the Melrose also runs local adventure tours, including a tasting at local wineries and an excursion to the spectacular Colorado National Monument. The wondrous natural beauty of the monument area is a must-see, and it's the perfect way to end your day here. The serene and the surreal jostle for your attention here. 350 million years of erosion have carved these stunning natural sculptures, vistas, and formations. Enjoy these views, and remember that they were ancient even when the first dinosaurs roamed these hills. The next town on our time tour through southwestern Colorado is Durango, which we will use as a base of operations for our visit to historic Silverton and our next stop, prehistoric Mesa Verde.
Just for a moment, imagine yourself as a cowboy on horseback. The year is 1888, and you're riding over these mountains and mesas through a snowstorm looking for stray cattle, when suddenly, and quite by accident, you stumble upon this.
That's the true story of one of the most amazing archaeological discoveries in American history. When ranch hands Richard Wetherill and Charles Mason discovered the ruins of an elaborate stone village built into these sheer cliffs, it had been sitting here quietly abandoned for 600 years. Today, Mesa Verde National Park includes hundreds of these cliff dwellings and is visited by more than 800,000 people a year from all over the world. Several of these pueblos are open to the public, including this one, which its discoverers named the Cliff Palace. Because the original inhabitants had no written language, many things about their lives here will probably never be known. But historian Dwayne Smith says that over the last 100 years, scientists have figured out a lot about them.
Well, Bill, we don't know what they call themselves. We use the Navajo term Anasazi, meaning the ancient ones. And they lived all over this Four Corners area. And people can see Chaco Canyon, and they can go to Aztec, New Mexico, and other places to see where the Anasazi lived. They came about 200 AD, or BC, excuse me, they came up this canyon, and they were here until 1300 AD. And this was the height of their culture. This is the largest settlement they had, Cliff Palace. And they were here, reached the zenith of the culture, and then about 1270 to 1300, they just started to wander off.
The Anasazi worked to live their lives in harmony with nature. Their choice to build these cliff dwellings where they did with a southern exposure shows careful attention to the cycle of the seasons. In summer, with the sun directly overhead, sunlight strikes only the front walls, leaving the back rooms cool and comfortable. In winter, the sun is much lower in the sky. Heat is passed more evenly to the rear rooms and into the cliff faces themselves. There are other ideas about why the Anasazi built these extraordinary cliff dwellings. For a first-hand look at one theory, be prepared to climb these long, steep ladders to another pueblo called Balcony House.
Well, as you can see, there's only one way up here. And for the Anasazi, they didn't have this beautiful ladder and these nice trails. They had hand and toe holes in these rocks. Now, one of the great mysteries of this park, and there are many mysteries, that's what makes this park so fascinating to me and to all visitors, is why would they come up here? Why would they leave these mesa tops where they had water and land and open space for their towns to come in here? Was there some kind of an enemy? Because obviously if you got here, the enemy's not going to be able to get in very easily. Was there a civil war? Well, we don't know that either. But we can all take guesses of this mystery, and we can look and imagine what it was like to live here.
Maybe they just wanted a good view.
They have a magnificent view, and you could put New York City and a lot of buildings down there and still see it. One final reason they might have come here, Bill. These were farming people raising their corn and their squash, and the best land is out there. And so live here and use the best land out there where the water is.
The Anasazi people grew and prospered in Mesa Verde for 7 centuries. Their religious dedication to maintaining a balanced relationship with nature can be found at another spectacularly located building called Sun Temple.
Well, Bill, this is Sun Temple, and it is the mystery of the mysteries that we've been talking about. Sun Temple was built here, and we don't know why. It was never finished. And there are no settlements right around here. So this was a ceremonial center, religious ceremony center, which served the people in the pueblos along both these canyons. Well, about the year 1270, they started to have a drought here. Now, all of a sudden, we go into a 30-year drought. But in the years from 1270 to about 1300, we start to move away. And for some reason, the Pueblo people never finished this.
Recently, scientists have discovered one more piece of chilling evidence. Whatever drove the Anasazi from the Four Corners area, the situation must have been desperate.
Well, this is certainly a popular spot with some wonderful examples of cliff-dwelling life.
It certainly is, Bill. And if you look right here, a kiva, a classic kiva, you'll find these in all of these Spruce Tree House, Cliff Palace, and also on top of the mesas. These were the ceremonial chambers, mostly for the men, and they would do their dances, ceremonies in here, occasionally coming out in the plaza. But an interesting thing about these is not here at Mesa Verde, but on some of the kivas outside of Mesa Verde, we found some ritual murders where they murdered young men and women and children and chopped them up.
Why would they do something like that?
I know it's gruesome to us, but perhaps they felt that by breaking the bones, they were letting out the evil. And again, go back to that mystery of why did they leave with the weather and the climate and the tensions and the pressures on them. Perhaps in some areas they turned to this.
Local tribes dispute the ritual murder theory, and without a written tradition, we'll probably never know what exactly did drive the ancient ones from this area of the Rocky Mountains. But when you visit here, it's hard not to miss the beauty and the majesty of the stone and clay they left behind, speaking for themselves.
From Mesa Verde, we return to Durango, where we'll catch an antique steam locomotive to the charming old silver town of Silverton. Durango itself is a pretty little frontier mining town that has adapted itself to the modern tourist trade. Nestled in the shadows of the San Juan Range of the Rockies, the town is surrounded by spectacular forest and high desert scenery that makes it a gateway to all kinds of recreation opportunities, including hiking, skiing, and rafting. Downtown Durango features beautifully kept Victorian buildings that date to the town's founding in the 1880s. The real landmark among these is the red brick Strater Hotel at 7th and Main Streets. If you've ever wanted to sleep in a museum, the Strater Hotel is about as close as you can get. The place is filled with authentic displays and memorabilia, and the rooms include the largest collection of American Victorian-era walnut antiques in the world. If you do decide to stay here, you might want to try to get room 222. Western writer Louis L'Amour was famous for soaking up period details about the locations he wrote about. He would frequently come to this room, and he finished several of his novels sitting right at this table. In addition to lodgings, the Strater has an old-fashioned honky-tonk saloon complete with ragtime piano player. All aboard! But for any history or railroad buff, there's no bigger thrill on a visit to southwestern Colorado than a chance to ride the narrow gauge railway to Silverton.
The town of Durango was literally created by the railroad. In 1881, the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company announced plans for a new rail line to carry precious ore from Silverton. Now, originally, they wanted to run the tracks through the town of Animas City, 2 miles to the north. But the city fathers there wouldn't agree to the railroad company's terms. So the railroad built a town, called it Durango, and ran the tracks right through there.
The 3.5-hour trip to Silverton is a thrilling ride through steep mountain gorges and dramatic scenery. The locomotives are 100% coal-fired steam engines built in the mid-1920s, and many of the passenger cars actually date from the 1880s. It's called a narrow gauge railroad because the tracks are spaced only 3 feet apart instead of the usual 4 feet 8.5 inches to negotiate the rugged mountain terrain. The climb into Silverton is steep. The rails follow the Animas River up 2,800 feet of elevation on less than 50 miles of track. At the end of the line, you'll find a different kind of mining town from Durango. Silverton is surrounded by scenic snow-capped peaks. The 9,300-foot elevation means it's cooler in Silverton, so dress accordingly, and the thin mountain air makes altitude headaches a distinct possibility, so you might want to pack aspirin. Silverton is also older and rougher than Durango, with gravel streets and quite a few ramshackle clapboard buildings that look as though they might date from the gold and silver booms that built the town. In fact, some of them do. Unlike many old western towns, Silverton has never suffered a major fire, so many of the buildings in town went up before the turn of the century. The town may look like the authentic Old West, but of course it still offers a comfortable travel experience. There are several fine restaurants and hotels in town, including the Wyman Inn, which was built in 1902 as Silverton's social hall.
The prospectors who founded the town came here looking for gold. Well, they didn't find much of that, but as they like to say here, they found silver by the ton. Unfortunately, the last mining operation closed down in 1991. But the narrow gauge railroad and all the visitors it brings helps the town to hang on even after the minerals that helped create it gave out.
After about 4 days touring the Four Corners and fossil beds, you can go east for more historic Rockies. From Grand Junction, take Route 70 to see where all that Silverton silver ended up, the Denver Mint. From there, head south on Route 25 to historic Pikes Peak and the U.S. Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs. Or stay in western Colorado. An hour north of Silverton is that famed frontier mining camp turned ski resort, Telluride. It's a year-round stop. The entire community is designated a National Historic District.
One of the great things about traveling in the Rockies is having the opportunity to traverse not just hundreds or thousands, but literally millions of years of history. Seeing dinosaurs, ancient pueblos, and frontier settlements all in the space of a couple days has a way of reminding us just how vast the canvas of Earth's past really is. I'm Bill Boggs. Thanks for joining us on Historic Traveler.
The long history of America's desert Southwest tells of richly varied and interwoven humanity: Native Americans, Spanish missionaries, and pioneer settlers.
Their convergence in this arid yet beautiful place has created an environment that's at once historic and timeless. I'm Bill Boggs, following the paths where the people of these ancient pueblos, towns, and missions met and mixed over the centuries, all places worth exploring for every historic traveler.
Our journey across the tapestry of southwestern history begins with one of New Mexico's earliest civilizations. We'll visit the remains of an Anasazi Indian pueblo at the Aztec Ruins National Monument. From there, we head south to the center of Spanish colonization in the area at Santa Fe. And we'll end with the graceful melding of the two cultures at the picturesque San Javier del Bac Mission in Tucson, Arizona. Carefully worked stone rises out of the New Mexican mesa. Finely cut blocks form the halls and rooms that comprise a large planned community. We know who built this place, but how and why and where they came from are lost in time. Visitors to the Aztec Ruins National Monument today can experience the haunting beauty of these tumbled walls and learn all that modern archaeology has been able to deduce about the natives who built them. But in the end, you'll find that the mystery of the place endures. The ruins are conveniently located right across the Animas River from the quaint historic town of Aztec, New Mexico. Although Aztec is a small town, it's taken great pains to preserve as much of its past as possible. The Aztec Museum and Pioneer Village includes Indian artifacts, an original frontier cabin, and the town's first jail. At the Step Back Inn, each room is named for one of the town's founding families, making it a charming and historic hotel for your visit to Aztec. Although it's called the Aztec Ruins, Park Ranger Grady Griffith says the name only underscores how little those first Anglo settlers knew about the previous inhabitants.
Well, when the early settlers moved into the Animas River Valley, they thought that this structure was built by the Aztecs of Mexico. However, it was built by the Anasazi, the ancestral people of the Pueblo today. It did take a great deal of organization, manpower, and obviously food to feed the people, but the Aztec Empire of Mexico rose and fell centuries before the Anasazi built this structure.
Anasazi was a name used by the Navajo living here when the white man arrived and means ancient ones. The Anasazi themselves left no written record of their lives. The Aztec ruin complex includes at least 2 major structures and several smaller sites. Only the west ruin has been thoroughly excavated and is open to the public. Modern dating of the timbers shows the west ruin was built all at once starting in the year 1111. But where the builders came from is uncertain. They may have come north from the Chaco Canyon, or they may have been local Indians influenced by the Chaco people. This artist's sketch shows how the village may have looked in its heyday. Almost 450 rooms rise to 3 stories in some places. They surround a large central plaza dominated by a large sunken ceremonial room called a kiva.
This plaza may look plain enough, but it's actually yielded a solution to one of Aztec's puzzles. In 1916, an archaeologist named Earl Morris began digging here. And under this plaza, he discovered 2 distinct layers of very different kinds of pottery.
His conclusion that there had been two separate periods of ancient occupation. First, the builders who worked in the style of the Chaco Canyon Indians to the south. Then a different pottery style showed that after a 70-year vacancy, the village was taken over by a new group of Anasazi with ties to the Mesa Verde people from the north.
Well, archaeologists think today that no more than 200 or 300 people actually lived within the structure at any one time. Many of the rooms were used for storage, just as we use our garages or storage sheds today. A virtual gold mine for archaeologists. And these are some of the things that came from that site.
But for the Anasazi, perhaps the most important rooms in the complex were the ceremonial kivas. There are more than a dozen kivas near Aztec, used for a yearly round of rituals and observances. In the 1930s, archaeologist Earl Morris began a complete reconstruction of the Great Kiva at the center of the West Ruin.
Well, Morris reconstructed it in 1934. He built the upper rooms, the 15 upper smaller rooms. He said in the excavation that he found nothing to indicate the use of those rooms. We don't know what they're used for even today. The four massive pillars supported a roof that weighed probably 95 tons. The four limestone discs came from at least 40 miles away, weighing about 400 pounds each, with no wheeled vehicles or horses. It was quite a chore. It showed that this structure was very important to the community. What that importance was, we're not sure.
Another ceremonial mystery the Anasazi left behind are the network of roads crisscrossing the entire region. Perhaps they were used for trade or pilgrimage. Perhaps the roads were symbolic or religious rather than practical. We may never know.
Around the year 1300, the Anasazi may have put these roadways to one final use. For no apparent reason, they suddenly abandoned not only the Aztec region, but this entire section of New Mexico as well. Scientists have been unable to offer any conclusive explanation for their departure or their destination. Without the written word, only the remnants of stone paths and buildings can speak for the Anasazi today.
Our trip through southwestern history now turns to the early influence of Spain at Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe's colorful central plaza is the heart of the town. It's the focus of the city's exciting cultural cross-currents and the perfect starting point for your exploration. In just a few hours, you can take a walking tour through 300 years of Santa Fe's history, all within a few blocks of this bustling city park.
The original name of the city was La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís, the royal town of the Holy Faith of St. Francis. You can see why they changed it to Santa Fe.
Your first stop should be this graceful adobe building bordering the plaza. It's the oldest structure in town. In fact, it's the oldest continuously used public building in the entire country. Known as the Palace of the Governors, it was built at the town's founding in 1610, a decade before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Today, the Governor's Palace is a first-class museum of New Mexico's history. Museum Associate Director Charles Bennett says the building first served as home and office to Spain's colonial governors and officials.
Well, Bill, one of the first things that the Spanish colonists did upon arrival here in the Santa Fe area is put the local Indians to work, doing various and sundry tasks. One of the more important tasks that they had to do was, of course, plow the fields and plant crops right away. They also wove textiles, different type of textiles.
Charles, where did the artifacts in this room actually come from?
Well, actually, Bill, most of the artifacts you see displayed here in this room were excavated in this room from various subsurface excavations that you can see through trapdoors here, including this one over here to my left, which is a storage pit dug by the Pueblo Indians when they occupied the building for 12 years during what we call the Great Pueblo Revolt, 1680 to 1692, when the Indians living in this area rose in revolt and actually expelled the Spanish from what is today New Mexico to El Paso, Texas.
After 13 years in exile, the Spanish reclaimed Santa Fe in a bloodless siege in 1692. These weapons date from the era of cooperation that soon followed as the Pueblo Indians and the Spanish fought side by side against invading Indians from the Great Plains. Also in the museum is a room dressed just as it was when the U.S. territorial governors used it as an office.
In 1878, the President of the United States appointed Lew Wallace, the governor of New Mexico Territory. Lew Wallace was probably one of our more colorful territorial governors. He was appointed in response to widespread lawlessness and corruption here in New Mexico Territory. He even had a few run-ins with Billy the Kid, one of our more infamous outlaws here in New Mexico. But most of his time was spent in a room here in the Palace of the Governors, much like this room that we're standing in, Bill, working on his novel that you've probably heard of, Ben-Hur.
Across the plaza from the Palace of Governors is literally the end of the trail, specifically the Santa Fe Trail. After Mexico declared its independence from Spain in 1821, American merchants opened the first major western trade route from Missouri to Santa Fe. Soon, Santa Fe was a destination for trappers, traders, and settlers of every kind, all tired, dusty, and needing a place to stay. They'd ride up to the end of the trail, and this is what they'd find: La Fonda, Spanish for the inn. Although this building dates only to 1919, there's been an inn on this spot since the town was founded. And with its striking mountain views and distinctive hand-painted furniture, La Fonda is still a fine place to stay almost 400 years later. With its long history, La Fonda has hosted many important people over the centuries, including President James K. Polk, Generals Sherman and Grant, and one man crucial to Santa Fe's history, Archbishop John Baptiste Lamy. To see Lamy's influence in stone and mortar, just walk across the street from La Fonda to the St. Francis Cathedral. The cathedral's French Romanesque architecture stands in clear contrast to the low adobe structures that surround it. Each of the two towers that flank the main church was planned to support a 160-foot steeple, but those plans were never fulfilled. On the north side of the cathedral stands a chapel, which was built especially to house New Mexico's most venerated figure of the Virgin Mary. Known as La Conquistadora, this wooden statue arrived with monks in the early 1600s and has been worshipped on this spot since the Reconquest in 1692. Another powerful sculpture found at St. Francis Cathedral is this likeness of Archbishop Lamy himself. Not only was he the driving force behind this cathedral, but Lamy also oversaw the building of 45 more churches and a handful of parochial schools throughout the territory. Another of the Archbishop's legacies can be seen just 2 blocks from the cathedral. It's the Loretto Chapel, and it has a remarkable story. The construction of the chapel was started in 1873 for the Sisters of Loretto and dedicated to St. Joseph. But when the building was finished, the sisters realized a horrible mistake had been made. The builders had included a wonderful choir loft, but had left out any stairway leading up to it. Carpenters were called in, but none could devise a solution in the limited space.
Then one day, as the story goes, an old man with a donkey and a tool chest came to the Mother Superior and asked if he could try. Working with just a hammer, a saw, and a carpenter's T-square, this is what he built.
This masterpiece of carpentry was built without a single nail. There is no supporting pole up the middle, and scientists have been unable to identify the wood used.
How this could have been done by one old man with primitive tools in the 1870s, no one knows. But more than one believer has suggested that it was St. Joseph himself, in person, who answered the sisters' prayers for access to their loft.
The final stop on our tour through the Old Southwest may be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the U.S., Tucson, Arizona. Tucson today is a vibrant, fast-growing metropolitan area ringed by the rugged mountains and deserts of southern Arizona. But in the shadow of the downtown skyscrapers, centuries of history lie mostly buried beneath a neighborhood known as El Presidio.
El Presidio means the fort. It refers to the 12-acre walled enclosure built here in 1775 to protect the Spanish colonists from hostile Apaches. The original Presidio included a chapel, cemetery, stables, and quarters for officers, soldiers, and settlers. The 12-foot-high walls were torn down long ago, but this black granite strip outside the Pima County Courthouse shows you exactly where the wall's foundations lie, 8 feet below the ground.
El Presidio is also the name of a delightful bed and breakfast that you might use as the headquarters for a visit here. Built in 1886 after the coming of the railroad to Tucson, this Victorian home represents just one of a wide variety of architectural styles in the Presidio Historic District, ranging from Spanish colonial to prairie style. Other sites of historic interest in the Presidio District include this monument near City Hall to the Jesuit missionary who first colonized the area for Spain in 1691. In addition to the Holy Catholic faith, Father Eusebio Kino brought cattle, horses, and crops to the place the natives call Chatuxchon, a name the Spanish took up as Tucson. But Father Kino's most impressive memorial can be found 15 miles southwest of town. That monument is not a statue or a plaque, but the mission San Javier del Bac, which he founded in 1692. Today, the church welcomes thousands of visitors each year. It's considered the finest standing example of mission architecture anywhere in the United States. Dr. Jim Griffith says the present magnificent structure went up about a century after Father Kino's arrival, and until recently, the name of the architect remained a mystery.
Contemporary thinking says that it probably was a Spanish architect named Ignacio Gaona, and he was working in the mainstream of the colonial Spanish Baroque, and that's where you get this wonderful, detailed, three-tiered facade with all the stuff going on it.
One unique aspect of the mission's design is the colorful interior. Virtually every surface in the church is brightly painted.
Well, it painted everything. If it wasn't moving, it got painted. And the reason is that in urban Mexico, there would have been oil paintings and tiles. We're up on the frontier. They didn't have those things, so they painted them on. And some of the paintings have painted frames around them and painted ribbons hanging them from painted nails.
Unfortunately, San Javier del Bac was not always so lovingly cared for through its life. After Mexican independence from Spain, the Mexican government expelled all Spanish priests in 1827, and San Javier was abandoned. Tradition has it that many of the portable items and statues were taken by the Indians into their homes for safekeeping. Birds took up nesting in Christ's crown of thorns. After southern Arizona became U.S. territory almost 30 years later, Tucson became part of Bishop Lammy's diocese headquartered in Santa Fe.
Under the bishop's attention, things really started picking up here. Priests visited San Javier more frequently, and sisters built a school out here, or started a school in this building right here, which incidentally is the 1750s edition of San Javier, picked up, moved around the corner, and reassembled brick by brick, stick by stick.
Still, time had taken its toll on San Javier del Bac. The dilapidated old mission would have to be either saved or eventually demolished. Luckily, in 1900, Del Bac became the responsibility of Bishop Henry Grandjean, who made it his mission to save this mission. He threw himself into repairing and restoring the historic compound using his own money and often working side by side with the laborers.
By 1907, this luminous treasure had been restored to its former glory. This beautiful new archway would become known as Grandjean's Gate. And with a new coat of whitewash, Mission San Javier del Bac would become known as the White Dove of the Desert.
Tracing this route through Southwest history takes about 4 days. But if you like the Aztec ruins, add a stop to Anasazi Site Bandelier National Monument off Route 4, about an hour from Santa Fe. Las Vegas, New Mexico, 2 hours east of Santa Fe, offers Civil War history at Fort Union. There are history demonstrations there in summer, and the Theodore Roosevelt Rough Riders Memorial and Museum is close by, a reminder of the Spanish-American War.
The American Southwest is unique. Like a cook stewing a pot of chili, the forces of history have blended influences of Native American, Spanish, and eventually Yankee culture. After 3 centuries of simmering, the spicy, flavorful result is right here, ready for you to enjoy. I'm Bill Boggs. Thanks for joining me on Historic Traveler.
If you have a passion for history and a love of travel, we've created Historic Traveler magazine just for you. Travel through time with Historic Traveler to the world's great destinations, from Wild Bill's Deadwood to Civil War, Virginia, Hemingway's Key West, Sherlock Holmes' London. You'll learn about Nashville's Parthenon and St. Paul's gangster past. At each destination, Historic Traveler tells you what happened there and makes your trip more fun with handy trip planners, maps, walking tours, side trips, and more. You'll get up-to-date information on the best places to stay, where to eat, and things to do. Call toll-free 888-228-8383 now for a 1-year subscription to Historic Traveler for just $11.97. If you have a passion for history and a love of travel, we've created Historic Traveler just for you. Call 888-228-8383.